Do you remember your first job as a teenager? It was a chance to take on some responsibility and start earning a paycheck. For a shy, mild-mannered 18-year-old in Punta Gorda, Florida, the overnight shift at the local convenience store seemed like a perfect fit. But on Halloween night of 2015, a quiet evening of working solo devolved into a real-life horror show. This is the case of Kyle FARISHIAN. Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 27 of Crime Cave. I'm Christy, and I have to say it's good to be back in the cave. I ended up taking a little hiatus this summer. Some of you know that I have a band, and summertime can be crazy busy with festival season, so I've had to put my energy elsewhere, but I really appreciate the interaction on the YouTube channel and the Crime Cave Facebook page and the messages I've been getting on Instagram. So I really appreciate you listening and I appreciate your patience, but I'm glad to be back. For this episode, I'm jumping in with a case that really struck me because of the randomness and the senselessness of it. I actually hadn't heard of this case until pretty recently, but I wanted to get this story out there. So let's get to know Kyle FARISHIAN. Kyle J. FARISHIAN was born on March 17, 1997, and raised in Naples, Florida, by a very loving family. He was described as a down-to-earth, kind-hearted kid. His younger sister, Keston, would say they'd often hang out together, taking long bike rides, playing Xbox, as well as stuff they probably shouldn't be doing, but that they do them together. Kyle was very protective of his sister, making sure that he was the one in charge and never letting her forget it. His mom, Bobby Jo, enjoyed a close bond with her son, even during his teen years. If she was having a rough day, he was comforting and reassured her things would be okay. Kyle loved the outdoors, but he was also an avid gamer and loved anything having to do with technology, cell phones. He also had a fondness for older model vehicles. His Facebook page contains photos of several classic cars. His maternal grandfather's page has similar cars, so it may have been a hobby that the two of them shared. His stepfather, JJ, said that their blended family was close-knit and that Kyle was just a really cool kid. Among the many descriptions I read about him, there was a common theme. Kyle was an extremely well-mannered young man. He was outgoing around his family, but among others, he tended to be quiet and shy. He didn't have a lot to say, but when he did, it was of major kindness and value. The high school football coach lived nearby, and when Kyle would see him working in the yard, he'd say, "Hey, coach, need any help mowing the lawn?" And he'd jump right in. His parents were proud of the person he was becoming and saw an exciting future ahead of him. By the fall of 2015, 18-year-old Kyle was living with his dad in Punta Gorda, Florida, and spending weekends with his mom, stepdad, and sister, 50 miles away in Lake Placid. He was attending Island Coast High School and had gotten a job at the local 7-Eleven convenience store on Bal Harbour Boulevard and Aquiesta Drive. Kyle was excited he could work the night shift and specifically chose those hours so he didn't have to interact with so many individuals. It would be a great opportunity to work on his confidence while not being overwhelmed by too many customers. At 10 p.m. on Saturday, October 31st, Kyle began working the overnight shift. Although it was Halloween, Punta Gorda had consistently been ranked one of the safest cities in Florida, and Kyle was scheduled to work alone until 3:30 a.m. when another employee would join him. At 3:11 a.m., the front door chimed, indicating someone had just entered the store.
In Charlotte County, one person is dead following a fire at a 7-Eleven store in Punta Gorda. This happened at the 7-Eleven at the intersection of Bal Harbour and Aquiesta. We know the Punta Gorda Police Department, the fire department, and the medical examiner are all on scene this morning. We're working to get more information on how this fire began. We know that it is a white male who passed away in this fire. We have a crew on scene. We plan to update you.
At 3:17 a.m., a young couple on a cigarette run pulled into the 7-Eleven parking lot and noticed a fire in the front of the store. with a body laying in the center of it. They immediately called 911 and then drove away, reportedly too rattled to stay on scene. When first responders arrived, they were initially confused. The rest of the store wasn't damaged. The fire was contained. What would prevent this individual from escaping the building in time? Detectives Justin DeVolt and Norman Nara struggled to make sense of the shocking scene, and for a fleeting moment considered the possibility that this could be some sort of Halloween prank. However, the blaze was extinguished by 3:25 a.m., and they began to process the horror in front of them. What they found was what appeared to be a young male employee, badly burned, lying near the front counter in a pool of blood. Upon further inspection, it was discovered that he had been shot twice in the head. Kyle's coworker arrived for her shift at roughly the same time as first responders, and although she prayed that Kyle was outside somewhere, when EMS described what he was wearing, she knew it was Kyle. At 7 a.m., back in Lake Placid, Bobby Jo missed a call from her ex-husband. When she called him back, she received the most devastating news of her life. She and the rest of the family made the trip to Punta Gorda and spent endless hours at the police station in disbelief, grieving, crying, and waiting for answers. JJ said not knowing who did this to Kyle, the dad side of him was being eaten alive. The community was devastated by the loss of someone who was friendly to everyone and didn't appear to have any enemies. Family, friends, and members of the community gathered together for Kyle's funeral. And because of his love of classic cars, his parents arranged to have his casket transported in a vintage Chevy pickup. The 911 callers were identified and quickly ruled out as suspects. Police noticed cameras mounted throughout the store, but a couple of them appeared to have been partially melted. The DVR was not damaged during the fire, but it was possible that smoke may have corroded the electronics. Investigators collected the monitor and the hard drive and began going through hours of video footage. The picture was grainy at times, but what investigators witnessed on the screen before them was horrifying. At 3:11 a.m. on November 1st, a thin, wiry individual, covered from head to toe, was wandering throughout the store, carrying a red gas can and a long-barreled revolver. Hearing the front door chime, Kyle can be seen walking from the back of the store to the front, looking around for the customer. He retraced his steps looking down the aisles when the man suddenly stepped out from the third aisle and shot him in the head. Kyle immediately fell to the ground, and the assailant shot him a second time in the head at point-blank range. He then haphazardly poured gasoline over Kyle's body and the front counter, then grabbed a lighter out of the display tray to try to set him ablaze. It took 3 attempts before he set him on fire. He then fled the store. No words were exchanged, nothing was stolen, and the entire crime took place in 78 seconds. Investigators admitted they sat in stunned silence the first time they viewed that footage, and then began to dig into every detail, as well as release video footage of the assailant to the public. Meanwhile, another employee of the 7-Eleven store asked to speak with investigators. She said that they recently had a situation with an irate customer within the last couple of months. The conflict began in early September when the customer came in to purchase a case of beer, but became belligerent when he was asked to remove his ID from his wallet. When he refused, she said she wasn't going to sell him the beer and told him to leave the store. It should be noted that Kyle was in training that day and was behind the counter witnessing the entire incident. The customer then began to point aggressively at each employee and demanded to know their names. The customer told them to have a great day and stormed out. In the weeks that followed, the customer showed up again and the situation escalated, resulting in a trespass warning being issued against him. When he later violated that warning, the same female clerk told her coworker, which happened to be Kyle, to call 911.
Get away from me!
The irate customer continued his harassment by phoning the manager on her cell phone, as well as filling out online complaints. As investigators studied the video footage of the assailant, they noticed the individual had a very unique gait, almost a limp, with very specific aggressive mannerisms. When they looked at the video of the killer side by side with the irate customer, several of the physical characteristics and mannerisms matched up. Furthermore, police received a call from a tipster who said his neighbor resembled the man in the video and also owned the same camouflage pants. This man's name was Michael Russo, a 28-year-old man with no history of employment, but he did have a history of aggressive behavior and threatening people for no reason. Police were able to obtain a search warrant for Michael's home. They found an extensive gun collection and a neatly organized row of red gas cans. But this was not enough for an arrest. Meanwhile, Kyle's family did what they could while waiting for justice. A fundraiser was organized, and people from all over Florida pitched in to help. A local restaurant provided the food, and 8 bands in the area donated their time and talents to increase the reward money for any tip leading to an arrest from $11,000 to $20,000. There was no DNA linking Michael Russo to the crime scene, but detectives made some interesting discoveries. One of the red gas cans in his home had a white paint stain on the top that matched the one in the video. A partially singed and melted latex glove tip was found in Russo's garbage can. And one of the guns that Russo was known to have owned was a long-barreled revolver, which was now conveniently missing. 5 months after Kyle's murder, Michael Russo was arrested and charged with murder and arson. He pled not guilty. The 2-week trial began May 30th, 2017, and after 6.5 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of second-degree murder and first-degree arson. On July 17th, he was sentenced to life in prison with an extra 30 years for the arson charge. But none of this answers the question, why? And how does this responsible young kid find himself training for his new job and happens to be on the sidelines of some altercation with a customer, and he winds up dead 2 months later because of it? One thing is for sure. Kyle FARISHIAN was more of a man than Michael Russo will ever be on his best day. Kyle's family continues to take his loss day by day. And his stepdad, JJ, says that every morning they have to put together a new plan and how they're going to deal with it. But they get through, and they remember Kyle as a kind, helpful young man who had a positive impact on the world in his 18 years. Michael Russo is incarcerated at the Central Florida Reception Center in East Orlando. The 7-Eleven location in Punta Gorda has permanently closed. And now for today's listener question. Okay, today's question is from Drew, and he wants to know what true crime shows I would currently recommend. Right now, I am into watching Evil Lives Here on Investigation Discovery. I just found another show called Married to Evil. Notice a trend here. And then I actually watched yet another docuseries on the Laci Peterson and Scott Peterson case. It's called American Murder, Laci Peterson on Netflix, and it's pretty good. Now, it didn't offer a ton of extra information or things that I hadn't already heard in previous documentaries, but I really did like the interview segments with Laci's mom, Sharon Rocha, and Laci's best friends. I thought that was interesting and insightful, so I would recommend that as well. And then, of course, there's always my old standbys, See No Evil, Dateline, and American Monster. You cannot go wrong. All right, thanks, Drew.
Hey, everybody, it's Ray the Roadie.
And this is Hollywood Mike
With the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast, coming to you from the Illinois Rock and Roll Museum on Route 66 in Joliet, Illinois.
where once a week we are interviewing local musicians and singer-songwriters. And the podcast itself covers a wide range of topics, including but not limited to, the history of rock and roll in Chicago, the current state of the scene, and the challenges and opportunities facing musicians today.
So join us every Tuesday for a new exciting episode of the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast.
Thanks for joining me. This episode of Crime Cave has been brought to you by Fortress Defense Consultants, providing security consulting for educational institutions, corporate facilities, and houses of worship, as well as pepper spray, situational awareness, and defensive firearms training for police and private citizens. Find Fortress on the web at fortressdefense.com. Contact Fortress directly at 708-522-8060 or email them at info@fortressdefense.com. Avoid being the subject of a future episode of Crime Cave. Train with Fortress today. Until next time.